Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Old Hunt, where we are still celebrating 10 years of Bloodborne. We are playing through version 1.00 of the Japanese release, and last time, we didn't make a lot of physical progress, but I think we had some interesting revelations. We went into the Lumenflower Gardens, a place up in the Upper Cathedral Ward, and when we were there, we ran into a bunch of celestial emissaries, right? Envoys from on high. And that sort of put us in mind of the other celestial emissaries we found, envoys from the Earth to the stars, maybe? And Imposter Yosefka's ability to create them out of people from Yharnam. And so we came back here to the clinic, checked in on Imposter Yosefka, found her in a strange state of mind, so had to sort of put her down, I suppose, got the third umbilical cord from it, and then we had to take some time to ponder what exactly might have been going on, what the story may have been with Imposter Yosefka on this night of the hunt. And that, it sort of ends up getting interrupted, right? Because one way or another, or even if you don't end up killing this character, you come to the end of the game yourself, and that ultimately steps on your ability to find out how this particular storyline would have progressed, left to its own devices. So we can never really know how this was going to turn out. But nonetheless, I still think this is a very cool addition to the game. I think it's a very interesting storyline. And I think it shows off, right, because again, this is a 10-year celebration of Bloodborne. I think it shows off a way that Bloodborne does its storytelling in an efficient manner, right? Because you have all these people, right, shut up indoors inside their houses, and it seems to me that that was part of the constraints that Bloodborne was working under, right? They only had so much time to put this game together. They only had so much money to put this game together. And especially at the end, it seems like they were really rushing to get things finished. And so I think that probably tied into the relatively low number of interesting NPC hunters you can run into out in the world, right? People like Eileen, people like Dura, right? They're there. It's not none of them. But people like Alfred, right? I'm trying to think of others. And there are a few, but I feel like the number is somewhat fewer than you would get in a game, say, like Dark Souls. And a lot is made of the people being shut up behind doors. So you have a lot of people who are there that you never see. But I think that Bloodborne is able, under those constraints, to tell some very interesting stories, right? Gilbert's whole progression is out of sight. You have the people throughout Yharnam who give you a lot of just sort of atmospheric information about the hostility of the city, and then the transformations that they undergo, and the madness that grips them. And then you have storylines like this, where, just remember the initial switch, right? It's so easy not to even notice that, right? And it's can you tell the difference between the two voice actors? The two delivery? You can, if you're listening for it. If you're not, it's really easy to just brush past it. And maybe you don't find the cave that brings you back around to the back of Yosefka's clinic. There are so many different ways in which this storyline is sort of hidden, and you have to investigate it, right? And that's another thing that you can see, right? Is there's a sort of contrast that's set up between the two different safe havens, because what does Imposter Yosefka want to do? She wants to investigate. She wants to learn. She wants to use people. She wants to use you. She wants to use the people you send her so that she can ascend. What does the Erden Chapel Dweller want to do? The Erden Chapel Dweller wants to make friends and help people. And that's what he tries to do. And those storylines can obviously go in different ways, but the different sort of philosophies that are tied to each individual place that you can send people, I think make for an interesting contrast, especially when you get to the question of, yeah, Imposter Yosefka is doing a lot of questionable things, but she's also undeniably getting some results, some interesting results. And is all of this suffering maybe worth it if we get something out of it in the end? And that sort of goes back to this idea, right? If we think of Char Thermos's parallels to the world of medicine in real life, and how we have all these body snatchings and all these histories of vivisection of animals, and the anatomists cutting people open, and the illegality and all these things that went into early medicine. But we come out with the modern medical machine, right? And the wonders that we can do in modern medicine. how much of that is worth it? Like, and we don't, we live now. We don't necessarily have to make the hard choices anymore. I mean, there are still hard choices to be made, like I'm sure, but not the same ones. And we can sort of rest on that body of knowledge. And back when that knowledge was being acquired, some of that acquisition was a little bit more questionable. Well, what if the same thing could be said for your Imposter Yosefka's storyline here, right? And so I think that this really does get at, and of course there's multiple other ways that I'm sure you could take this storyline. But I feel like it adds a lot to the game, like I've been saying, and they do it, I think, very economically and in a way that makes it compelling the whole way through. And of course also in a very FromSoft way, in a way that you could lose at any moment and sort of miss out on. And so it ends up rewarding your investigation. So I just think that's a very cool aspect of this game. However, we have other quests, other aspects of this game to explore in this particular episode. Before we quite get to those, though, I did want to bring up something that I got wrong in the previous episode. I had thought that Martin Szigeti was wanting me to do a visual comparison and look at visual continuity in various uniforms across the ages. But in fact, Martin Szigeti was making something of a different point about a contrast that maybe leads into a sort of tragedy of the choir, which that's an idea. I think the tragedy of the choir, I think it's something I kind of want to come back to a couple times here, because I think it's going to be an interesting way of framing some of the information we get. But before we quite get there, I want to set up this point that I failed to deliver on in the last episode. So we're here with the student uniform, and if we consider the last lines of this description, the last two, the last whole section here, we can see how it's talking about how school head Willem would surely despair if he knew how the focus was on sort of outward form rather than on thought or philosophy. I forget what the exact official translation is, but that's the idea that I'm getting just from the quick scanning of the Japanese here, right? And so we know that going forward, the sort of direct descendants of Byregnwerth didn't necessarily care about the intellectual heritage of Byregnwerth. Well, you know who does care about the intellectual heritage of Byregnwerth? It's the members of the choir, right? Final two lines of the blindfold cap here. The blindfold on this piece of headgear is like evidence of their direct lineage with school head Willem, right? The thoughts of Byregnwerth. And Martin Szigeti was making the point that because the sort of link has been broken, they might think that they have this intellectual heritage, but in fact, they're doomed to never have it, right? They're doomed to disconnection. And on the one hand, I think that's a cool idea, especially when you go with the idea of the choir sort of not being satisfied with their parent organization of the church and looking for substitutes and potentially ultimately finding the great ones. That's a cool idea. But my own take on this is a little bit different. If you remember back to what I was saying in Alfred's storyline, where I talk about how people think of him as a fanboy because he can't have been sort of in the original band of executioners, but he sort of has come along later, discovered their teachings and adopted them for himself, decided that he's going to carry forward the legacy of the executioners, and he's all about sort of honoring them. And that's the thing, and it just so happens that the thing he honors them by is beating someone to a merciless pulp. But, you know, we can't all have great intellectual heritages like maybe is going on here with Byregnwerth. But I think it's something similar that's happening with the choir, right? I think that they have this disconnection with the School of Mensis and potentially the other like people in the church who do have this emphasis on the form rather than the content, right? Rather than the thought or the philosophy. But we know they're raised up doing experiments, right? And so it's almost like they're rebuilding the work of Byregnwerth. And in doing that, they could potentially reconnect with that work. And that's not the only piece of it, right? It's not just this theoretical thing where maybe they could have independently recreated and therefore rediscovered and relinked up with the intellectual heritage of Byregnwerth. There is potentially a direct connection between the two organizations. And that is going to bring us into what I want to get done in this episode. So I'm going to warp back to the Hunter's Dream, use a bold Hunter's Mark. I got plenty of them. I'll see you shortly. Okay, we are back in the Hunter's Dream. And I just want to check to make sure that my weapons are in good order here. So let's repair. Yep. Okay, very nice. And then I just want to verify. I want to come in here, do the gem thing. All right, and so note here, I want to do that experiment, get that sort of mechanical information going, where I've got 157 base fire damage because I've converted the weapon, and then we're adding 104 from this particular fire gem. So I want to keep that in mind as we head back to where we left off in, where is it? Right here, in the Lumen Flower Gardens. This location name, by the way, it's sort of a made-up term, right? We have the kanji for star again. We have the kanji for, like, ring or circle. And it can be used as, like, a counter for, like, blossoms or, like, the heads of flowers, right? Because they form this, like, nice circle. So I think it makes sense to take it in that sense, especially because the final kanji in this initial 3 kanji compound is grass, right? So we have this like celestial flower related thing, right? And the official translation is lumen flower. And then of course we have no, which is of, and then like garden or maybe courtyard. And so you have the lumen flower garden. And, you know, I think that's a great, very evocative, like in a similar sense to the Japanese translation. So just thought I'd call that out. We're going to go there right now. Okay, so speaking of things that you can entirely miss in these games, look at this. I can just so easily imagine never realizing that you can go right through that window. And of course, we're now above the Grand Cathedral itself. There's that altar with its very mysterious visual formation. We get that item that's going to be potentially very important here. We get more celestial emissaries. Oh, I went to the wrong corner. How much is that going to hurt me? Oh, not too much. And I've got the regenerating HP thing going on, so cool. All right. And now we head down. Spatially, this seems to be behind the altar for the Healing Church, which is kind of fun. We come here into this very strange scene. We have these creatures here, which we've seen before, which I want to, like, call out again. Note how they've got these, maybe, tiny little wings? It's kind of hard to see, but if you look just off their back, I think I've got them in the little sun ray right now, and one of them is sort of twitching back and forth, or was, it seems to be stopping. But there are these little wispy things that might be wings, and then they've got the little grubby, I don't know, appendages, and the, like, sort of, I don't know, suckers? Eyes? I don't know what, coming out of their heads. Very strange. Strange beings. Then we have this very large thing, which definitely seems to have wings. Also note that this is the Altar of Despair. Altar of maybe Lamentation might be another way of taking that. Not entirely sure because it's off the screen now, but I think that was Nageki, which could be Lamentation. And appropriately enough, when we come over here, this figure, this very strange creature, which again has these very large, no longer wispy, but somewhat similar to those wispy wings that we saw before coming out of her back here. And these protuberances from her head. And she is like prostrated before this thing here, which bears a strong, very striking resemblance to Ram the Vacuous Spider. And is sort of overgrown with what looks like tomb mold and has candles with melted wax atop it. So, I mean, we know from the location name that this is the Altar of Despair, so this presumably is that despairing altar? The altar at which this creature is despairing, perhaps? And this is just an interesting thing, another thing that we're going to have to keep in mind. But in the meantime, I think it's time I actually fight this boss. Totally optional. But you can interrupt her lamentation. And here it is. This is the big reveal. We have Ebrietas, daughter of the cosmos. Right, and again, literally, the first kanji there, right, it's Hoshi. So it's, you know, star, planet, celestial object, what have you. Very vague. And then beyond that, we have No, which is of, and then Musume, right? So maybe daughter of the stars, if you want to translate it that way. Like, that wouldn't be out of the realm of possibility. And then Ebrietas, which is the boss name, right? Just phonetic. And as far as that boss name is concerned, it can be used to mean, like, I think it's a type of moth or butterfly, I can't remember which. The term Ebrietas, like, does appear. I think it's a Latinate term. Again, Latin, associated with the Healing Church. This is a great one right here. Underneath, behind the Healing Church altar, in an area sort of, or off of an area associated with the choir. Right? So we are getting a direct connection to the choir. But I don't want to talk too much about lore right now. I'm getting destroyed. That's fine, because I want to run an experiment anyway. So, let's see. I think it'll be best to explore this off of a head slam. Uh-oh. One where I don't get hit, maybe, though. Because that'll be a little bit more of a practical situation. That's not long enough. Nope. And I get rushed, of course. We've worked her all the way back along the altar. Come on. Come on. Hit me with that head slam. Not the swipe. Not the swipe. How many swipes do you have? Hit me with the head slam, please. Nope, not the lunge. Alright. Ebrietas is not cooperating. I mean, why should she, really? We're being very rude. Man, if I had dodged, that would have been perfect. I'm wasting a lot of blood vials. That's okay, though. Alright, I'll take it. Nope, I won't take it. I'll miss. There we go. 1, 2, 3. Alright, 3 regular hits. 1272. I might get interrupted. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I'll just die. That works too. Okay, I've come back to the Hunter's Dream because that's the whole point of this experiment here. I need to change out my blood gem fortification for this weapon. We want to go all the way here, and now I want to get as close to 104. Oh, good, perfect. Except this adds slow poison. I don't think that's going to be a problem. We're going to go to 157 plus 104 lightning. And I don't think that slow poison is going to be much of a difference at all. And I want to compare and see what happens when we fight against Ebrietas now. I'll cut forward to that. Okay. It's been a little while in real time, but I think the number I was aiming at was 1279. That's how much damage 3 swipes from my Saw Cleaver did with that fire gem. 104. Nope. Straight into the lunge, which I'm not very good at dodging. Okay, that's the wrong thing. It's going to be another lunge, isn't it? Nope. That's fine. Got to stand in sort of the right... Nope, that's the lunge. Okay. Definitely don't dodge it by trying to outrun it. That's a bad idea. Okay. Come on, head slam. I specifically... Yeah, you're going to lunge at me from that far away. Maybe I should pick up my blood echoes. That might be nice. Not to lose those. Okay. Come on. There it is. 1, 2, 3. 1303. So, yes, Ebrietas is weaker to lightning. than she is to fire. But the difference between, what was that, 1270 something and just over 1300, it's like 30 points of damage. That is fairly inconsequential. So I'd say that pretty much confirms, when it comes to like realistic numbers, Ebrietas, at least as kin, is pretty darn weak to fire, right? I don't think it's necessarily crucial if you don't have a strong... Ooh, I dodged it. If you don't have a strong lightning gem, or bolt gem, you don't necessarily have to go out of your way. Oh, great. The choir set is not very strong to frenzy. Oh, I dodged the lunge again. I wonder if there's a difference between the quick step there and the roll, because that's really the sort of one thing that's changed in this equation. But, okay, now that I know the information I know, I can just try and beat the boss. Easier said than done, of course. Yeah, there must be something about the quick step that makes it a little bit easier to dodge that particular lunge attack. Oh boy. Alright. She can spit that frenzy stuff several times. The little ones, by the way, which I've been hinting at it long enough, I think, which sort of resemble Ebrietas, they also have the ability to sort of spit out that liquid that causes frenzy. So they sort of seem like... oh, that hurt. Oh, another opportunity here. Okay. They sort of seem like maybe they'd be the children of Ebrietas, except, uh-oh, I didn't think it would get me. I thought I was out of reach. Oh, I probably lost. What a fun attack that is. Am I alive? Oh. Not for long. What a way to die. Okay, I'll be back for a serious attempt soon. Okay, so I have put the strongest bolt gem I have in the weapon. I'm getting, I think it's a plus 126. I'll verify that in editing, to the base damage now. I don't think it'll make that big of a difference. Oh, let's compare. No, I didn't get the last hit. No! Ah, what a shame. Oh, that's okay. There it is, 1438. Okay, that definitely makes a difference. The difference between the plus 104 and the plus 126. Like, that is a noticeable difference in damage, like 100 points or so. But to finish... Oh, I might die again. So, actually, before I finish the other thought, I will just sort of bring up again that... or bring up ahead of time, that if this run isn't successful, I will, cut forward so you don't have to waste as much time as I will in real time. So we'll see how this fight goes. But I did want to sort of come back to the thought that, like, it sort of seems like maybe those creatures outside are like Rom's children. Not Rom. Ebrietas' children. But they sort of can't be, right? Because we know, one thing we know about Ebrietas is that she's a great one. Uh-oh. I gotta change my gear, actually, if I'm gonna do serious attempts. Because getting frenzied all the time like that, not ideal. I don't want to get grabbed by that. That would be instant death again, I'm sure. But great ones all lose their children, right? So they can't be Ebrietas' children, even though they sort of look like mini Ebrietases, and they all sort of face towards where Ebrietas is, right? They seem very tied to Ebrietas. But they're not her children. So, instead, like, what do we have as an option? It sort of seems like those would be her, well, familiars is the word I want to use. but it's, what do they call them? Like augurs, forerunners, right? The phantasms that are associated as familiars of the Great Ones, right? And I kind of wonder about this now, in retrospect. I've never really thought about this before. But when you're doing your Chalice Dungeon explorations, you can create a Chalice Dungeon, I think it's Lower Tumaru, actually, that is... associated with Rom the Vacuous Spider. Okay, here we go, phase 2. This is so cool. Uh-oh. It's this one. No! Woo! Oh no! I'm gonna get frenzied. Boom! Also, I'm not in the aura right now, but... check out what happens to my health when I am. It immediately starts to deplete. Of course, I have an HP regenerating thing, so that sort of counteracts a little bit of that effect. But I just love the idea that being in the presence of Ebrietas just saps your life. Takes away your vitality. Uh-oh. If I get hit, I am doomed. Oh man, I just happened to dodge correct to miss the frenzy hit? Oh, sweet! I know that's theoretically possible. I don't think I've ever done that. That's crazy. Anyway, to finish the thought about the familiars, you make this Chalice Dungeon, Lower Tumaru, and it's associated with Rom the Vacuous Spider. It has a whole extra layer. And we know Rom, of course, is also a great one. And the spiders fill the dungeon. No! I was torn between safety and greed and was rewarded with neither. So basically, I'm wondering if whether or not those spiders are like Rom's familiars. No! Oh well. Interesting, I can dodge into that grab. Uh-oh. This is what kills me. Ha! Got it. No phase 2 yet? No, that slam also killed me. That rampage. Good. Okay, that was a good time for that grab. It's a bad time for that lunge for me. Oh well. Okay, I see what you're doing. Could have been worse. Come on, go into phase 2. Oh, here we go. That's what I was waiting for. All right. Oh, come on. All right, I'm preemptive. But I still got it. There it is. There it is. Okay. And, oh, I clicked through that a little bit too fast, but we picked up the Ease Chalice, and that's going to be something to keep in mind. Whew, okay. We did it. Got through a nasty little fight with Ebrietas. It was a fun one, I think. I always worry a little bit when I come back to these bosses that I've, gone through the chalices, and maybe it's not going to be as impressive as usual. No, I'm blown away. Once again, had a good, challenging time of it, and that was amazing. So, happy to have been successful in this attempt against Ebrietas. But, of course, just the presence of Ebrietas is, I think, extremely cool. And this gets back to something that I've been thinking about a little bit in terms of how not just Bloodborne, but a lot of the Soulsborne games tell their storytelling, right? And how they invent these worlds with these mythic figures and then place those figures inside of the worlds. So when you ultimately do have the revelation of them, it feels just incredibly epic. And Ebrietas is definitely one of those beings, right? It's someone who completely falls into line with that way of doing things. You walk in and you find out, oh, this is Ebrietas, right? First of all, this whole area, the Upper Cathedral Ward, is optional. You never have to do this to complete the game. It's just a bunch of extra information, enemies, like things that you could totally skip if you don't care about it. If you've had enough of tangling with Ebrietas, you could just skip all this and you wouldn't even miss it, right? But if you do take the time to explore, I think it enriches your understanding of the world of the game, and it gives you some fun things to do, and it's an interesting boss fight. But beyond that, right, it's hidden within the optional section, because you have to think to break that pane of glass, whether you roll into it or you attack it, right? And then you get one very cool revelation, which is you're on top, you're at the higher level of the Grand Cathedral. That's cool in and of itself. Then you come down this secret elevator behind the main altar, and you get to Ebrietas worshipping at this one, or lamenting at this one, right? Crying at the altar of despair. We catch her in this moment of lamentation. Then we awake her and we have the combat. And this right here, right, like, is proof that the Healing Church certainly, but probably the choir, and we'll get a little bit more explicit confirmation of that as we go. Not 100% explicit, but still very strongly implied that it's the choir who run into Ebrietas. And this is going to tie back into some of those things that I was setting up, right? I don't think we can necessarily do all the lore on Ebrietas in this episode, because that was an intense fight, and I've been going some length of time, and I don't want to, like, overstay my welcome here. So some of this is going to have to wait. However, remember, actually, I want to be in consumables, because I'm looking for the Augur of Ebrietas, which still works, by the way. I think it would be hilarious if after you defeat Ebrietas, you could no longer use this. I mean, it would be terrible gameplay-wise, but it would be really funny, and, thematically relevant. Then again, maybe it's kind of cool, because the idea is maybe that you can defeat this form of Ebrietas, but she is not gone. So maybe there is some sort of eldritch reason that we can't fully grasp, which is why we'd still be able to summon abandoned Ebrietas. or a portion of her. Alternatively, maybe even though she is dead, her corpse can still be summoned to your will via the arcane energies and still do damage, right? That's another way we can understand it. But the real reason I have this up is not to talk about that. It's to take a look at the final section once again, which I think I had just up on screen in the last episode, where we're talking about how the chance encounter became the beginning of this inquiry, that is the search for outer space or the cosmos in the underground ruins. And again, my speculation has been that the Byregnwerth scholars went down and they had this eldritch encounter with Ebrietas, and that became the thing that kicked off their inquiry into the nature of the cosmos and the Great Ones and all of this stuff in the Tomb of the Gods. They found a god, right? And final line here, right? That will connect with the later choir. So already we're building one of these implications, right? The idea that what started everything for Byregnwerth is also maybe what started everything for the choir. Because the choir, in their experimentations, in their chalice dungeoneering, seem to have stumbled across Ebrietas, right? And this gets back to the sort of theory that I was putting forward of my own at the start of this episode, that maybe there is this connective tissue that we can draw to the School of Byregnwerth that explains maybe why the people in the choir have succeeded Byregnwerth's intellectual heritage successfully, because they made a discovery of Ebrietas just like Willem and the Byregnwerth scholars did. Now, maybe, right, this is very interpretive, it's speculation on my part, but I think that could be pretty cool, interesting little connection there that could explain that sort of, linkage in the intellectual line of succession, essentially, because they sort of independently were able to come to the same truth of the universe. And of course, we know that the choir then goes about investigating things in their own way, right? They have their own methods. And this gets back again to something I was setting up in the last episode where I talked about the thing that kicks off their interest in the sky, in the heavens. The cosmos might be just above our heads, right? Where does that idea come from? Because again, I've always thought of, right, the choir stumbled across an epiphany, like very suddenly and without warning, something to that effect. I can't remember, again, the very effective wording of the official translation word for word, but something to that effect, right? Something, that idea. They had this unexpected revelation that they just stumbled into, that they weren't expecting. Well, that sounds to me like they stumbled into Ebrietas, right? But the revelation is the sky and the cosmos are one, right? So are those two things exactly the same? Or maybe is there an intermediary step? Because if it's the same, why do they care about the sky if they find Ebrietas in the Tomb of the Gods? You would think they would care more about, just like Byregnwerth did, exploring the underground ruins. No, the choir has their own methodology. They're going to search for the cosmos in the sky. And what turns them away, unlike Byregnwerth, what turns their focus upward, right? So I think that is a valid question to ask, even if I've long thought that the discovery of Ebrietas sort of explains that. Maybe it had something to do with those weapons that are infused with cosmic energy that are made from, meteoric iron that fell from the sky. It's a possibility. I don't necessarily know if that's what was the cause. There might have been something else, but this is something that people in the comments were talking about a couple episodes ago that I wanted to come back to, because now I think we have a better understanding of the sort of layout of the situation, right, and what could have caused this. And so my idea might be, if I wanted to keep the inspiration for looking up with Ebrietas, maybe they're sort of working together, and it's Ebrietas, it's the interest that Ebrietas has in looking up at the sky that sort of coincides with what the choir is doing. Because, where was this? Was it on the choir set? Okay, here it is, right? So we know that from the final portion of the, non-blindfold cap version of the choir set, that they look for signs from the stars, looking up at the sky together with the abandoned Great One, right? And since we know that not only did the choir seem to discover Ebrietas, but they seem to have been keeping her back here, right? It sounds like, from that description, on this particular, set of attire here, this final section, that they looked up at the sky together. And I think it's pretty clear to me, like, I know that it's not 100%, but it still seems very clear to me that Misterarita Joisha, when we have in the Augur of Ebrietas that same exact phrase in reference to Ebrietas, and the choir found Ebrietas, and the choir seems to be keeping Ebrietas secretly behind the altar of the Grand Cathedral, right? And they're the secret brains of the healing church. All this, to me, points to the idea that the abandoned Great One that they're that they're looking up at the skies with together is Ebrietas. So it could be that something about the discovery of Ebrietas turned their attention upwards, and it wasn't anything except, the attempt to maybe communicate or do something with Ebrietas herself, right? That sort of kinship that they feel with Ebrietas, and Ebrietas looking to the sky, may have allowed them to stumble across their revelation that they should be looking up, right? They shouldn't necessarily be looking at the ground, they should be looking up. And maybe we can see another sort of parallel. This is one of the other things that I wanted to get at when I was talking about the sort of idea of family, and both the people in the choir from the orphanage and also Ebrietas, because we know that Ebrietas from, let me go back actually, to put the relevant item on screen. We want to go back to the Augur of Ebrietas, right? Ebrietas is the abandoned Great One, right? Her boss name, when you actually get into the fight, is Daughter of the Cosmos. But every single time we see the phrase abandoned Great One, I personally think of this phrase in the Augur of Ebrietas, where we have Ebrietas identified as the abandoned Great One. And so it sounds like maybe Ebrietas was abandoned by other beings like her who went to the stars, and now she is looking up at the stars constantly in search of companionship. Now that is also interpretive on my part, right? I can't say for sure that those are the people who abandoned Ebrietas. Maybe it's something else, right? Because we know that Ebrietas is the abandoned Great One. Abandoned by who? Who actually abandoned Ebrietas? Is it, like I was thinking, the other Great Ones who've all gone somewhere into the sky, maybe not far into the sky, but far enough into the nature of the cosmos that they're no longer to be found below ground in the tombs as they once were? I don't know. They're there when we go into the Chalice dungeons, but I mean, how much can we read into that? Ebrietas will be in one of the chalices if we go there. Is she in two places at once? Or maybe being connected to the cosmos means that you can sort of project versions of yourself? Like, I don't necessarily know how that works, but it sort of seems to me like you could maybe take this idea and say that, okay, Ebrietas was abandoned by the other Great Ones, but it doesn't have to be. Could just be the choir, right? Could be they found her, they stuck her behind the altar in the Grand Cathedral, and they were like, that's interesting, maybe we'll do experiments, and Ebrietas now feels like utterly abandoned. Or maybe they, the choir lost interest after a certain point and wanted to make contact with, more sky beings and left Ebrietas behind to her own fate. That's another possibility. Who else could have abandoned Ebrietas? The Byregnwerth, right? Because it seems like Byregnwerth was potentially the first people to make contact with Ebrietas. Maybe they had some sort of communion going on, and then Byregnwerth eventually ran down into nothing, essentially. Master Willem just rocking in his chair by the lake is all that's left of Byregnwerth, and maybe Ebrietas feels abandoned by Byregnwerth. So it is interpretive on my part to say that Ebrietas was abandoned by other Great Ones, and she longs for companionship. But I do think it lines up. And I like the connection between the choir, who were the orphans raised in the orphanages, who would be looking for parents, and they might see the figures of the Great Ones as sort of parental figures, right? Ebrietas could sort of fulfill that role, and she herself feels abandoned by creatures that are like her, so she's looking up at the skies. Also, what do we find her doing? We find her lamenting at this altar that looks a lot like Ram the vacuous spider. So perhaps she's feeling abandoned by Ram specifically, right? Maybe not just Great Ones in general that are like her, but Ram specifically. Alternatively, maybe Ram was like the newcomer, right? The newly ascendant pseudo Great One, like Great One in fact, but not like capable of truly giving Ebrietas a lot of companionship, but better than nothing. And then when Rom was lost, that's all the more tragic for Ebrietas. Maybe? You have to speculate. There's just not enough information in the game. So it sort of comes down to which story you like to tell the best, which story you feel best fits the evidence. And for me personally, I like the idea, like I said, of this sort of connection that Ebrietas has with the members of the choir, because they're both looking for great ones. They're both looking for these parental figures from on high. And maybe the discovery of Ebrietas wasn't immediately the revelation to look to the skies, but it became that revelation to look to the skies when they brought her up, and that's where she began facing. And, you know, maybe we could sort of see the people in the choir to Ebrietas sort of being like the things that I was speculating might be understood as her familiars, right? The kin, right, of Ebrietas. Just like maybe those spiders in the Lower Tumaru dungeon are sort of the familiars, the kin of Rom the vacuous spider, and they appear also in the Moonside Lake. So these great ones always surrounded by their forerunners, the phantasms, right, the invertebrates, the mollusks, or whatever. All of that seems like it could be possible. But again, it's a complicated set of connections, and it involves a ton of speculation. You have a lot to do with the lore. And now, before I end the episode, there is one more thing I want to do here at the Altar of Despair, which is we need to get the most anticlimactic end to a quest line ever. We can speak to this altar, whatever this is, this Rom-like thing that maybe is the Altar of Despair. Sure seems to be converted into the Altar of Despair, or Lamentation. And something's going to happen. We have the option, when we speak to this thing, to offer up a fragment of flesh. What fragment of flesh do we have on the altar here that we could put on the altar here? We have the queenly flesh. And we just get that. It's a quick fade out, fade in, and then we get a message that tells us that time has been wound back for this lump of flesh. That's the indication that we get that Annalise is now back to normal. She is once again the Vile Blood Queen we knew. So I think I'll save checking up on her for the next episode. We've got a good amount of lore to get through as well that's all related to the choir and Ebrietas and all these other things. I'm going to save that for next time. This was, I feel, a pretty eventful episode, despite the fact that, again, didn't go super far. We just went into a window, came down here, and fought Ebrietas. But, I think in terms of the ground we needed to cover for the lore and the speculation and the things that I've been entertaining as ideas throughout this playthrough, we did all right. So I will say goodbye to you in the dream, as usual. Okay, we are back in the dream. I have acquired the East Chalice, the Great East Chalice, I think it might be called. I haven't looked at it, so it's probably, uses the kanji for die somewhere in the Japanese. That would make sense. But we'll get into that in the next episode. I might go into that Chalice dungeon in the intervening time, because that's how I'm thinking I'll be able to get a hold of some powerful arcane boosting triangle blood gems that will make my rifle spear finally come online. And so if I can get that going by the time we get to the next episode, I'll be very happy. Might take a little bit longer than that. We'll find out. In the meantime, I will leave you, as always, to comment with your own thoughts on anything that I've said in this episode, anything you thought I got wrong, anything you want to add, your own perspective if you want to share it. I welcome all these things. Of course, as always, any feedback you have for the series in general. But, I hope you've enjoyed this exploration of the Upper Cathedral Ward. We've got a little bit more lore to get through, but we'll get to that soon. Till next time, I'm going to call an end to my hunt for the evening, and I wish all of you good hunting. All right, well, that works. Good hunting, everyone.